The personal finance internet has spent 20 years telling the middle class to cut small recurring expenses, the latte, the streaming subscription, the dinner out. During those same 20 years, the structure of middle class spending shifted underneath everyone's feet. Housing got bigger, vehicles got more expensive. Subscription infrastructure was invented from scratch. Child raising norms inflated. The categories that were supposedly fixed, the ones you weren't supposed to question, were the ones doing the actual damage. And the more the audience focused on the coffee, the less anyone was looking at the categories that mattered. I want to walk through four expenses that most middle class households call necessary. Every one of them is a luxury operating in disguise. Not because the category is optional, you do need somewhere to live and some way to get to work. Because the level at which the expense is currently set is a choice the household made years ago and has stopped recognizing as a choice. The luxury isn't what you spend on, the luxury is what you stopped questioning. Let me show you what this looks like before I get into the categories. A woman I'll call Diane sent me her budget last spring. She's 47, works as a hospital administrator, makes good money, household income with her husband around $165,000. Midwestern suburb, two kids in middle school and high school. By any reasonable measure, they should be financially comfortable. They weren't. They were falling behind every month, and Diane couldn't figure out why. She'd done the conventional work, canceled two streaming services, switched to store brand groceries, started making coffee at home. Everything the personal finance internet tells you to do. She was saving about $180 a month from all of it combined. I looked at her budget for 10 minutes and told her something she didn't want to hear. The $180 didn't matter. Four-line items on her budget, items she'd labeled fixed and necessary and never questioned, accounted for 71% of her take-home pay. She wasn't overspending on luxuries. She was treating her luxuries as necessities, which meant she'd never thought to question them. That's the trap. And it's not about willpower or discipline. It's about which category an expense lives in. Let me walk through the four most likely to be hiding in your necessary column. These aren't just four expenses. This is the structure your entire financial life is built on. Category 1. The house that's larger than your life requires. The standard advice is that housing should be no more than 28% of your gross income. That number is wrong for most people, and it's wrong in the direction of being too generous. The 28% rule was set by lenders, not by financial planners. It's the maximum a bank will let you borrow without flagging the loan as high risk. It's the level at which the bank's finances work, not yours. The level at which your finances work is closer to 20%, sometimes lower, depending on your other obligations. Most middle-class households are sitting at 30 to 35%, and they call it necessary because they signed the mortgage years ago. But the mortgage isn't necessary. The house is necessary. The size of the house, the location of the house, the finish level of the house, those are all choices. Choices the household made years ago, often when their income looked different or their expectations looked different. Diane's housing was 34% of take home. Her family of four lived in a 2,900 square foot house in a neighborhood where the schools were good, but not measurably better than the schools 5 miles away in a different neighborhood with houses 30% cheaper. They'd bought the larger house in 2019 because the rate was low and the payment seemed manageable. 5 years later, the payment was the same dollar amount but a much larger share of their actual life. The reframe. Housing is a necessity. Your specific housing situation is a luxury you've stopped recognizing as one. Category 2. The vehicles that cost more than they need to. The average new car payment in the United States is now over $700 a month. The average used car payment is over $500. The average household has more than one vehicle. A two-vehicle household with average payments is spending $14,000 to $17,000 a year on vehicle payments alone, before insurance, fuel, maintenance, and depreciation. For most middle-class households, the all-in cost of transportation is the second largest category in the budget, behind only housing. And almost none of them call it a luxury. The reframe. A vehicle is a necessity if you don't have transit access. The specific vehicle you've chosen, its age, its segment, its features, its financing structure, is the variable. The same trip to work and back can be made in a 10-year-old sedan with no payment or in a current model SUV with a $750 payment. The trip is the necessity, everything else is the luxury. Most middle class households are spending luxury segment money on a function that doesn't require luxury segment spending. And they've stopped seeing it because the payment has lived in their budget for so long that it feels like rent. Diane's household had two payments: the older sedan at $310, 3 years left; the newer SUV at $680, 4 years left. Combined, almost $1,000 a month before insurance. Category 3: the subscription stack. Not the streaming services are the decoy. The audience already knows about those and has already cut the ones they don't use. The subscriptions, are the ones that fund middle class lifestyle infrastructure: gym memberships and fitness apps, meal kit services, cloud storage tiers, premium versions of free apps. Software subscriptions for personal use, identity protection, extended warranties, subscription boxes, cable bundles, phone plans with features the household doesn't use. Pet insurance, home warranty plans, credit monitoring you're also getting free through your card. Individually, each one is small: $20 here, $40 there. Each one feels necessary in isolation because each one solves a small problem the household identified at some point in the past. In aggregate, the subscription stack for a middle class household now averages between $400 and $600 a month. That's $5,000 to $7,000 a year on services that mostly didn't exist in this form 15 years ago. All of which the household now treats as fixed costs. The reframe: the subscription category as a whole is a luxury, even if any individual subscription seems reasonable. The audit isn't, do I use this? The audit is, would I miss this if I'd never had it? Most subscription spending fails that test the moment you ask the question honestly. Category 4: the lifestyle infrastructure around children. Middle class child raising in 2026 includes a category of spending that didn't exist in this form when most of the parents doing the spending were themselves children. Travel sports, private tutoring at the level of expensive supplementation rather than remediation, brand name children's clothing replaced annually, multiple structured activities per child per season, birthday parties as production events, vacations framed as educational, tech devices for children at the same tier as adult devices, college savings targeted at private tuition levels regardless of the child's likely path. Each of these gets defended with the same phrase: it's for the kids. And because it's for the kids, the household never audits it the way they'd audit any other expense. The reframe: children are a necessity if you've chosen to have them. Food, healthcare, shelter, clothing that fits, basic education, those are necessities, and nobody should feel bad about spending on them. The lifestyle infrastructure that's grown around middle class child raising in the last 20 years is something else entirely. It's a luxury budget that the culture has quietly reclassified as necessity. A childhood without travel sports is not a deprived childhood. A childhood without brand name everything is not a deprived childhood. The previous generation raised children without most of this, and the children turned out fine. They turned out to be the adults watching this video. The honest audit isn't whether the expense benefits the child. Most of these expenses do, marginally. The honest audit is whether the marginal benefit justifies the cost in a household where the parent's own retirement is underfunded. For most middle class households, the answer is no, and the household has never asked the question. Diane and her husband were spending around $1,400 a month on the kids beyond food, healthcare, and basic clothing. Club soccer for the younger one, travel volleyball for the older one, a private SAT tutor at $200 a session, phones, tablets, and laptops at the same tier as the adults in the house. A 529 contribution targeted at private tuition levels for two kids who would almost certainly go to in-state public universities. None of this was unreasonable on its own. All of it, in aggregate, was a luxury budget operating under a necessity label. Quick check-in. Of those four categories: housing, vehicles, subscriptions, or child-raising infrastructure, which one are you most offensive about right now? The category you're most offensive about is usually the one carrying the most invisible luxury. Drop a 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the comments. I read them and they shape what I cover next. Here's the part that ties this together. The reason these categories stay invisible isn't that the audience is bad with money, it's that all four of them got reclassified as necessary during a period when nobody was paying attention. House sizes grew, vehicle prices grew, subscription infrastructure was invented from scratch, child-raising norms inflated. None of it happened in a single moment that would have triggered a budget review. It happened gradually over 15 or 20 years while the audience was being told by the personal finance internet to focus on lattes. The latte conversation wasn't just unhelpful, it was actively misdirecting attention away from the categories where the real money was going. Every minute the audience spent feeling guilty about coffee was a minute they weren't spending auditing the line items that actually moved the needle. And the industries that benefit from the invisible categories, the home builders, the auto manufacturers, the subscription economy, the youth sports infrastructure, were happy to let the latte conversation continue. It functioned as a kind of cover. As long as the audience was focused on small expenses, the large ones could keep growing without anyone noticing. So, what do you actually do? 3 steps. Same structure as the previous video on allocation. Steps that work in the order I'm giving them. Step 1. Run the structural percentage on your own budget. Add up housing, vehicles, subscriptions, and child-related lifestyle costs. Divide by your take-home pay. That's your structural percentage. Under 50%, you have room. Between 50 and 65%, you're at the typical middle-class level, defensible but not optimal. Over 65%, every other financial decision you make is being constrained by these 4 categories whether you realize it or not. Diane's number, when we ran it, was 71%, which is why the $180 from cutting streaming services didn't matter. There was no version of her budget that worked without addressing at least one of the structural categories. Step 2. Pick the one category you can actually move. You're not going to restructure all 4 at once. The household doesn't have the energy for that, and the changes are too large to make simultaneously. Pick the one with the highest leverage given your specific situation. Housing has the highest absolute leverage, but the highest friction. Moving is expensive, emotional, and disruptive to school routines if you have kids. It's the right answer if you're significantly overhoused and you're early enough in a mortgage that the equity hasn't accumulated to the point where leaving is costly. Vehicles have the second highest leverage with much lower friction. Selling a vehicle and replacing it with a cheaper one can be done in a weekend. For most middle-class households, this is the category with the best return on effort. The subscription stack has the lowest absolute leverage, but almost zero friction. It's the right answer if you want to demonstrate to yourself that the household can make changes before you tackle a larger category. Run the subscription audit first as a confidence builder, then move to vehicles or housing. The child raising category is its own conversation and probably requires both parents present, possibly multiple conversations over weeks. Don't try to do it in a single sitting, and don't try to do it without the spouse aligned. Step 3. Replace the category, don't just cut it. This is the step that almost everyone skips, and it's why most budget restructuring fails. If you cut your vehicle payment from $750 to $300, the $450 difference has to go somewhere. If you don't direct it somewhere specific, automated, immediate, before it hits your spending account, it will get absorbed into other spending within 3 months, and you'll end up at the same total outflow with a cheaper car. The replacement has to be set up at the same time as the cut. Increase the retirement contribution. Increase the mortgage principal payment. Move the difference into a high-yield account that isn't your checking account. Whatever you do, automate it before the cut takes effect, not after. The behavioral pattern is the same as the allocation discussion. The optimal change on paper doesn't matter if the actual behavior doesn't follow. And the behavior won't follow unless the system is built before the willpower runs out. Back to Diane. She didn't move. The housing category was the largest, but the friction was too high. The kids were established in their schools. Her husband's commute would have changed. And the equity in the house was meaningful enough that selling and rebuying smaller would have eaten most of the gain. She decided to revisit housing in 3 years when the youngest finished middle school. She sold the SUV. The household kept the older sedan and replaced the newer vehicle with a 5-year-old used SUV, paid in cash from the sale proceeds and a small chunk of savings. Monthly vehicle outflow dropped by about $600. She audited the subscription stack and cut a little over $300 a month, which surprised her because she'd already done the obvious cuts. The non-obvious cuts were the categories she'd stopped seeing: the cloud storage tier she didn't need, the gym membership she used twice a month, the identity protection she was double paying for through her credit card, the phone plan features that hadn't matched her actual usage in years, the pet insurance on a healthy dog where she'd paid in 9 times what she'd ever claimed. She didn't touch the child raising category at all. She and her husband talked about it once, agreed it was a real conversation, agreed they weren't ready to have it yet. That's a legitimate answer. Not every category has to move at once, and pretending otherwise is how households burn out on the whole project. Between the vehicle change and the subscription audit, she freed up about $900 a month. All of it was automated into retirement contributions and a separate savings account before the changes took effect. 6 months later, she told me she didn't notice the money was gone. The household ran exactly the same way it had before. The kids didn't notice. Her husband didn't notice. She didn't notice. Except in the quarterly statements where the retirement balance was climbing in a way it hadn't climbed in years. The $180 she'd been agonizing over at the start, she didn't bother with most of it. She put the streaming services back. She started buying name brand groceries again when she preferred them. She stopped feeling guilty about coffee. The luxuries she'd been calling necessities turned out to be where the actual money was. And the necessities she'd been calling luxuries, the small things that made the household feel like a household, those were fine. They were always fine. Here's the frame. The middle class isn't bad with money. The middle class has been told to look in the wrong place for 20 years. The expenses that actually determine whether a household is financially healthy aren't the small ones the personal finance internet obsesses over. They're the structural ones housing, vehicles, subscription infrastructure, child raising norms that grew quietly during a period when nobody was auditing them. Because everyone was busy feeling guilty about the wrong things. The latte conversation wasn't just unhelpful, it was actively misdirecting attention away from the categories where the real money was going. Every minute the audience spent feeling guilty about coffee was a minute they weren't spending auditing the line items that actually moved the needle. And the industries that benefit from the invisible categories, the home builders, the auto manufacturers, the subscription economy, the youth sports infrastructure, were happy to let the latte conversation continue. It functioned as a kind of cover. As long as the audience was focused on small expenses, the large ones could keep growing without anyone noticing. The luxury isn't what you enjoy, the luxury is what you've stopped noticing. And the categories you've stopped noticing aren't going to start announcing themselves. They've been sitting in your budget for years pretending to be necessities. The only thing that changes them is you sitting down with the four numbers and asking, honestly, which ones are choices you'd still make today if you were making them for the first time? Run the structural percentage on your budget this week. Add the four categories, divide by take home, look at the number. If it's over 65%, you've found where the work is. The streaming services were never the problem, they were the decoy that kept you from looking at the actual problem for a decade. The work is in the four categories. The result of doing the work is a household that runs the same way it did before, with hundreds or thousands of dollars a month flowing somewhere that compounds. Instead of somewhere that evaporates, that's the trade. And the only thing standing between most middle class households and that trade is the willingness to look at four numbers honestly.